I'm looking at the Russian dictatorship and I'm seeing vivid similarities with the United States. Let me explain. Of course, I don't mean in terms of the actual workings of the system. America is a democracy right now. Hopefully it stays one. What I mean is that the American culture is being transformed into the type of culture that led to the dictatorship in Russia. So Russians unquestionably support their leader. And I know you guys do not want to believe that because you want to stay hopeful about Russia. But we as Russian-speaking people know quite well the rhetoric in the Russian society. There are two major factors as to why Russians support their leader despite him being extremely bad for the Russian people, the Russian economy. Number one is he's the master of misinformation in manipulating facts, creating fakes. The second factor is the Russian culture. There is this widely spread belief in the Russian culture that it's better to have this strong, independent leader instead of having the messy democracy where you would elect weakened leaders who would have weakened position in the world arena. This cultural feature probably comes from the Russian history. And I, as a hopeful person, always believed that the American society could never become a dictatorship because of the American culture. The reality is that checks and balances can be eroded. But if America has the culture of rebellion, which I believed it did, based on the American history, then it wouldn't have been possible for an extreme, strong dictator to grab that power in the American society. That's why I actually believe that the American culture is very similar to the Ukrainian one, because Ukrainians had at least 3 revolutions through its newest history in order to prevent a Ukrainian leader from becoming a dictator. And I believed American culture was that as well. Here's what I see about the American society right now. More than 50% of Americans decided to dismiss everything that was done to the American democracy, to the American economy and the American system by the incoming American president. They're ready to dismiss every extremist statement, every single piece of misinformation by the upcoming president, as well as people who are close to him, because they believe he can save America. Much of what was said during the presidential elections was misinformation, especially when it comes down to economics. So we have blind following of an extremist leader who has done and said a lot of terrible things, and we have an extremely effective misinformation usage by him and the people around him. He said, I suspect I won't be running again unless you do something. Unless you say he's so good, we have to just figure it out. And a year ago, Anna would have said that's bullshit. American people would never let this happen. Now I just don't really know. And I think a strong counter-argument could be, hey, we have a whole bunch of apolitical branches in the American system that preserve the checks and balances. We would say judicial system. Well, we have some doubts about apolitical stance of the judicial system, especially the Supreme Court, right? Military, foreign service, all these branches are typically apolitical. But the reality is that during the first Trump's presidency, he substituted a lot of career professionals with political loyalists. We all know what happens to your career if you go against Trump. And I suspect that he's going to further erode this apolitical stance of all branches of the American government. And I'm really scared that the American rebellion culture is further going to be eroded and have more similarities with the Russian culture. And I'm scared that the system's checks and balances are going to be eroded. So unfortunately, we are going to be on a crossroads very soon. And I genuinely hope Trump is a good president for America. But based on evidence, unfortunately, I'm pessimistic. So Russians in America predominantly support Trump. Let's discuss why. In my opinion, there are 4 major reasons for this. First one is the Russian legacy of a strong man. The Russian culture likes to praise the Russian historical figures that have this authoritarian character. They even claim that sometimes strong authoritarian figure is better because it helps to preserve the social order. Many Russians support Putin because they believe that his decisive, pragmatic style helps Russia to go back to its previous glory. Trump's rhetoric aligns for them with those characteristics. The second reason is very frequently Russians fall for populism. Russians are accustomed to viewing politics through personal loyalty and charisma instead of looking at institutional checks and balances, just because of the nature of the system they grew up in. Naturally, when a big populist leader comes to power, that is super appealing to them. The third reason is that many Russians live in their small Russian bubble. Because very frequently a lot of Russians in the United States stay within their Russian community, they don't really understand the complexities of the American system. Separation of power, the role of Congress, the checks and balances, etc. So very frequently within that bubble, they view politics through the lens of one leader. Here, politics isn't about the complex interaction of various parts of the system, where power is distributed through different branches, more about selecting a leader with an incredible character that is going to determine the future of America. Because in Russia, the future is determined by a single leader. So Trump, being a savior of the United States, is very much appealing to them because of the lens in which they view politics. Of course, the fourth and most obvious reason is that they think that Trump is going to be aligned with Russia, because most Russians generally support Putin's actions in Ukraine. They also think that sanctions against Russia are unfair, that sanctions stem from Russophobia, not because of the evil acts of Russia. They think because Trump would be more willing to cooperate with Putin, that will benefit Russians from the perspective of sanctions, as well as general freedom for Russia to do whatever it wants.